March 16, 2008, unfolded like any other Sunday in the quiet coastal city of Santa Monica, California. The neighborhood was tranquil, the streets deserted, offering no hint of the brutal act that had occurred only hours before. But inside a modest bungalow, a meticulously arranged tableau of death lay in wait. Responding to a welfare check, the first officers on the scene were immediately met with the overpowering smell of natural gas. A single candle was burning near the entrance, its flame a delicate, dangerous trigger. Someone had deliberately turned on the gas stove, but the pilot light was extinguished. The home had been converted into a crude incendiary device, a clear attempt to incinerate the scene and destroy all traces of the crime. But the trap failed to spring. Deeper inside, investigators would find something far more grim. Lying in a back bedroom was the body of a 21-year-old woman. Her name was Juliana Redding. She had been choked to death. The murder of Juliana Redding would become a case that haunted detectives and tore at her family for the better part of a decade. The investigation wasn't stalled by a scarcity of clues, but by an agonizing question. With so much physical evidence, why had justice remained so elusive? Juliana was raised in Tucson, Arizona, by a loving and stable family. Her parents, Patricia and Greg Redding, had given her a secure upbringing, and by every measure, her childhood was content. She was a student at South Point Catholic High School, where she gained a reputation as a driven young woman with an artistic soul and a fiercely independent spirit. Juliana's ambition was not merely a quest for celebrity. Her ultimate goal was to own her own business, perhaps a clothing boutique, and to forge a life entirely of her own making. Upon graduating, Juliana made a choice common among aspiring artists. In 2005, she relocated to Southern California, pulled by the allure of a career in modeling and film. But leaving Arizona never meant leaving her family behind. She maintained constant contact with her parents through frequent calls and a steady stream of text messages, returning to Tucson any chance she got. Their connection was powerful and constant. By 2008, Juliana was settled in her own small bungalow in Santa Monica. To give her a secure foothold while she chased her ambitions, her father contributed to the rent. She was taking classes at Santa Monica College and working as a waitress to make ends meet between auditions. It was a difficult grind with inconsistent income, but Juliana seemed to be thriving. She was creating the life she had envisioned for herself. There was no outward indication that she was in any kind of peril. On Saturday, March 15, 2008, Juliana's day proceeded as usual. After playing some golf that afternoon, she went back to her bungalow for the evening. She planned a quiet night in, watching television, mostly episodes of the sitcom Seinfeld. A review of her phone logs would later confirm she was sending and receiving text messages for most of the night. None of her communications contained any hint of alarm, anxiety, or danger. Around 10 p.m., the messages ceased. It was the last time anyone would ever hear from Juliana. The next day, Sunday, March 16th, the normal rhythm of communication was broken by silence. Patricia Redding tried calling her daughter, but the calls went to her voicemail. She sent texts, but the replies she expected never appeared. Initially, she chalked it up to Juliana just being busy. But as the hours stretched on with no word, a quiet dread began to creep in. That dread solidified when Patricia received a call from Juliana's neighbors. They told her they hadn't seen any sign of her all day. They could hear her dog inside the bungalow, but the home itself was disturbingly still. The alarm intensified when Patricia discovered Juliana's car was still parked in the driveway. By early evening, a mother's intuition told her something was catastrophically wrong. At approximately 6:15 p.m., she called the police to request a wellness check. When law enforcement arrived at the residence, the exterior offered no immediate cause for concern. The street was calm, and there were no obvious signs of a break-in. But the moment they breached the doorway, everything changed. The noxious odor of natural gas hung heavy in the air. It didn't take investigators long to realize the gas had been turned on deliberately, while a lit candle was positioned nearby. It was a calculated plot to trigger an explosion and obliterate the crime scene. As detectives cleared the house, they found Juliana's body in her bedroom. Life had been extinguished hours earlier, and the signs of a violent confrontation were unmistakable. The room was in disarray, with furniture disturbed and personal effects scattered clear evidence of a struggle. She had fought for her life. A subsequent autopsy would confirm the cause of death: manual strangulation. Underneath her fingernails, forensic analysts found traces of her own DNA, co-mingled with the DNA of her killer, a silent testament to her final, desperate attempt to claw her attacker's hands away from her throat. Phone records would soon supply another devastating piece of the puzzle. During the assault, Juliana had tried to reach 911, but the call was terminated before it ever connected. People nearby would later report hearing sounds from the bungalow around 9:53 p.m. The previous night, the scrape of furniture, a man's angry voice. At the time, no one thought to be alarmed. In a city that never sleeps, such noises are merely part of the urban soundtrack. Only in the chilling silence of the following day would those sounds acquire a sinister resonance. Forensic teams moved through the crime scene with meticulous care. They collected a wealth of DNA evidence from Juliana's clothing, her throat, her phone, and the front door. The attempt to fill the small house with gas told them one thing: this was not a crime of passion. This was a calculated execution, planned by someone intent on erasing every trace of their existence. As detectives began to peel back the layers of Juliana's life, one name surfaced almost immediately. It was Juliana's father who first directed them to John Gilmore, the man caught with his daughter in a turbulent, on-again, off-again romance. Greg had never trusted Gilmore, describing a man with a volatile temper and a history that gave him profound unease. His past behavior was a map of red flags, from kicking in her car door in a rage to breaking into her home. To law enforcement, Gilmore was the textbook suspect. When they brought him in, he conceded that he and Juliana fought constantly. He told investigators they had been arguing via text message on the night of March 15th. Then, around 10 p.m., her messages stopped. He claimed the silence worried him, prompting him to drive to her bungalow the next morning. He saw her car in the driveway, but his knocks went unanswered. He told police he saw a candle burning inside, but he never smelled gas. He eventually gave up and left. For a moment, every piece seemed to point directly at him, but hard evidence would soon shatter that theory. Surveillance footage provided an airtight alibi, placing Gilmore at a Jack-in-the-Box and then a convenience store during the presumed window of the murder. His alibi was further solidified by numerous witnesses who saw him at a house party that same night. And then the crime lab delivered a stunning revelation. The most significant DNA profile recovered from Juliana's body and the bungalow wasn't male. It belonged to an unknown woman. With that single piece of evidence, John Gilmore was officially exonerated. The investigation was back at zero. But now detectives were confronted by a far more chilling question. If not the jealous ex-boyfriend, then who killed Juliana Redding and why? The clearing of John Gilmore plunged the investigation into a new, far more perplexing chapter. Detectives were no longer pursuing a narrative of a volatile lover or a simple crime of passion. The evidence was pulling them towards something colder, something meticulously planned and deeply malevolent. Juliana was not the victim of a fleeting, impulsive act of violence. The elaborate attempt to destroy the bungalow with gas pointed to foresight, a chilling level of preparation, and an absolute determination to bury the truth. The person responsible didn't just want to take a life. They wanted to erase the very fact that a crime had been committed. As detectives re-examined Juliana's world, scrutinizing every personal and professional tie, a different name began to surface. This was someone who had remained in the shadows during the initial phase of the investigation. But with each new interview, his presence became more defined, his shadow looming larger. His name was Munir. Munir was a physician, a man who projected an image of success and financial stability. He had met Juliana in 2007. She was a waitress in a Los Angeles restaurant, and by all accounts, she made a powerful impression on him. Shortly after their meeting, Munir offered her a job as his medical assistant, a position with better pay and a future beyond waiting tables. Initially, the arrangement seemed perfect. Juliana was grateful for the secure income, and Munir portrayed himself as a benevolent mentor. But the professional boundary between them eroded with startling speed. Their relationship turned intimate, and soon Juliana had moved out of her own place and into Munir's lavish Beverly Hills estate. What began as a life of comfort and security slowly twisted into something much more ominous. Friends would later recall how possessive Munir had become, how he seemed to need oversight of Juliana's movements and decisions. He buried her in expensive gifts and grand promises, providing endless financial support and even proposing marriage. He talked about buying her a luxury car for her 21st birthday gestures that appeared generous but felt increasingly like a web. A deep unease began to settle over Juliana. The relentless attention felt less like affection and more like a form of psychological control. She made a choice to reclaim her life. Juliana moved out of Munir's home and into the Santa Monica bungalow her father had helped arrange. She wanted her freedom. The separation itself was not openly hostile, but the emotional conflict beneath the surface was far from over. Shortly after she left, Juliana's father, Greg Redding, the investigation uncovered a far more devastating reality. Munir was not merely involved with Juliana. He was a married man with a wife and 3 children, living a separate life in Lebanon. When Greg was forced to deliver this news to his daughter, her world collapsed. She informed her father that all contact with Munir was to cease immediately and that she was severing the relationship entirely. For Juliana, the story had ended. For Munir, however, the final chapter had yet to be written. While Juliana created distance, Greg was bound to Munir by another tie. The two men were entangled in a joint business venture. As time passed, Greg developed a growing suspicion about Munir's operations, which appeared not just unethical, but possibly illegal. With these concerns escalating, their professional relationship finally fractured. It was a detail investigators would later find deeply unsettling. Juliana was murdered only 1 week after that business deal fell apart. As detectives dug deeper into Munir's life, they found another name, a connection so pivotal it would fundamentally alter the course of the investigation. Her name was Kelly Pack. At 47 years old, Pack had a significant and long-term history with Munir. A review of financial records uncovered a startling money trail. Over an 18-month period, Munir had funneled over $1 million to her in a string of large wire transfers. She was involved in many of his business enterprises and was known for her fierce devotion. But what investigators learned about her reputation was far more alarming. Pack was not some passive participant in his affairs. She was known as the one who intimidated people who had crossed Munir, who confronted his adversaries, and who applied leverage when conflicts arose. A chilling profile began to emerge. Detectives saw her as an enforcer, the person Munir deployed to resolve issues he preferred to remain insulated from. At this point in the case, the investigation required a delicate strategy. They had no physical evidence tying Pack to Juliana's murder. Confronting her prematurely could mean losing their only chance to definitively prove she was involved. Police initiated surveillance, a patient game of watching and waiting for an opportunity to covertly collect a sample of her DNA. That moment finally arrived, delivered in the form of a carelessly discarded cigarette. When the forensics lab returned its findings, the entire case was thrown into sharp relief. Kelly Pack's DNA was a match to unidentified samples recovered all over Juliana's bungalow. It was found on the front door, on the locks, on Juliana's clothing, on her phone, and in the most damning location of all, on the skin of Juliana's throat. The physical evidence offered irrefutable proof that Pack had been inside the bungalow and had made direct, violent contact with Juliana. There was no plausible, innocent explanation for its presence. Kelly Pack was arrested and formally charged with second-degree murder. As authorities prepared their case against her, they turned their focus back to Munir, only to find he had already vanished. Shortly after he learned of Pack's arrest, Munir fled the United States. It was believed he had sought refuge in Lebanon, a nation with no extradition agreement with the U.S. He was never subjected to questioning. No charges were ever filed. He had disappeared, slipping beyond the jurisdiction of American law. Prosecutors were convinced Munir was the central figure, the linchpin connecting every element of the crime. Their theory held that he had hired Pack to intimidate Juliana, perhaps as a twisted form of revenge for her rejection, or as leverage in his failed business relationship with Greg Redding. They believed an act intended to be a warning violently escalated when Juliana fought for her life, culminating in the struggle that ultimately killed her. When the case finally reached the courts, Kelly Pack pleaded not guilty. Her legal counsel launched a formidable defense, systematically attacking the prosecution's entire narrative. The most crippling blow to the state's case came from the judge, who ruled that prosecutors could not introduce the theory of Pack acting as Munir's agent, citing insufficient evidence. Robbed of that crucial context, the case was stripped down to a sterile argument over the physical evidence alone. The defense argued that without any eyewitnesses, there was no direct proof that it was Pack who had killed Juliana. They posited an alternative explanation known as secondary DNA transfer, proposing that Pack's DNA could have been passively carried into the residence on shared items, perhaps from Munir's own home, where Juliana had once stayed. It was a controversial but effective strategy, designed to introduce reasonable doubt. After years of postponements, the trial finally concluded in 2013. The verdict was a stunning blow to Juliana's family and to everyone who had followed the investigation. Kelly Pack was acquitted. As she left the courtroom, a free woman, cries of anguish and disbelief erupted from Juliana's family. They screamed that the system had failed, that the truth had been discarded. For them, the nightmare had no end. No individual was ever convicted for the murder of Juliana Redding. Munir remained in Lebanon, proclaiming his innocence from afar. He would later be arrested in Germany, facing allegations of medical fraud from botched surgeries that had left patients permanently maimed, only to be released from custody and return once more to Lebanon. Kelly Pack's name would surface again, years later, in connection with sweeping health insurance fraud investigations. He would post bond, only to melt back into the shadows, evading the authorities once again. For Juliana's family, the ache of her absence was a constant, unrelenting presence. Her mother, Patricia, sought refuge within the four walls of her daughter's room, where painting became a silent ritual, the only way she could process the overwhelming weight of her sorrow. In her own words, it was as if the clock of their lives had shattered in 2008, its hands frozen, their world unable to move beyond that single, catastrophic moment. Juliana Redding was a force of nature, young, driven, with an entire life yet to be lived. In the final, violent moments of that life, she fought back, leaving a silent testament in the evidence, a story the justice system was unwilling to hear. Her story remains a chilling illustration that the scales of justice do not always balance, that a truth, no matter how clear, can be left to wither without consequence. Juliana deserved more than a memory. The tragic story of Juliana Redding is a haunting echo of a life stolen too soon, a vibrant, one-year-old force of nature, whose dreams were extinguished by the very shadows she tried to escape. Her legacy serves as a profound, heart-wrenching lesson. Safety is not merely the absence of a break-in. It is the presence of genuine peace in our relationships. Juliana's journey warns us to look beyond the surface of protection. We must learn to recognize that a gift can be a web, and grand promises can be instruments of psychological control. When passion turns volatile and mentorship becomes possessive, these are not signs of love, they are red flags of peril. Never ignore the quiet dread. Whether it's a mother's intuition when a text goes unanswered or a gut feeling that a situation is shifted, that instinct is a lifeline. Juliana fought until her very last breath, leaving the truth written in the evidence of her own struggle. While the scales of justice may sometimes shatter and fail, we must never allow the truth to wither. Let Juliana's name be a call to action, to value our freedom, to protect our dreamers, and to listen to the whispers of danger before they become a silence that never ends.